Adriani, Associate Pastor here at Raleigh Court Presbyterian Church. This morning, our Wednesday devotional comes to us from Joel chapter 3, verses 17 through 20. Hear these words. So you shall know that I, the Lord your God, dwell in Zion, my holy mountain, and Jerusalem shall be holy, and strangers shall never again pass through it. In that day the mountains shall drip sweet wine. The hills shall flow with milk, and all the stream beds of Judah shall flow with water. A fountain shall come forth from the house of the Lord, and the water from Wadi Shittim. Egypt shall become a desolation, and Edom a desolate wilderness, because of the violence done to the people of Judah, in whose land they have shed innocent blood. But Judah shall be inhabited forever, and Jerusalem to all generations. As Dr. Laura Hartman talked to us last Thursday night about climate change, she began by asking how we talk about the climate, acknowledging that talking about it is important, but most often we don't. We give power to both what we talk about and what we don't. And during these last 2 years, our difficult conversation quota has probably risen as we've tried to find ways to talk about big, hard, and scary things truthfully, honestly, and with hope. How we choose to frame the stories of our lives matter. We know this, and I'm sitting currently in our history alcove here at the church that holds so many of the stories we tell about RCPC. We know this, and so does the prophet Joel, who writes the passage that we read today. We realize how we frame the stories of our lives matter. We know this, and so too does the prophet Joel, whose words we read today. The book of Joel was written without a specific time setting. This lets the book easily find application in the generations that follow, both within the people of Israel and for us today. The book opens with the life of the community being utterly destroyed by a plague of locusts. The locusts have caused more severe issues than ever before. There's nothing left for the people to do but to gather together, to fast, and to pray to God. It's a striking visual that brings to mind the beginning of the pandemic. Our way of life was brought to a screeching halt, and we were left with nothing to do but to pray to God. Yet Joel begins his book by telling us to tell your children of it, and let your children tell their children, and their children another generation. The book of Joel opens with this scene of devastation. But our reading this morning comes from the end of the book, in which a vision is cast for the people of God. And in this vision, the Lord their God, our God, dwells in Zion with them, abides with them continually. There is to be great abundance of water flowing and fields full, and the land will be inhabited forever by the Lord for all generations. That's what's to come. That's a promise to hold on to. But to get to this hopeful, promising ending, you have to wade through the middle of the book of Joel. And in this part, Joel describes what it is that the people are to tell their children. It's not all about the plague of locusts. Sure, the severity of the situation we should be honest about. But that's not the focus of what it is they're to tell their children. The focus is God's steadfast love and presence made known to them even in that moment of crisis. To share the stories of God's steadfast love, the way God hears their prayers and delivers them. It's not quite a mighty deliverance like the one from Egypt we find in Exodus. It's not quite such a mighty act as all of creation or the olive branch that is found after the flood, but the people are nevertheless delivered from their current crisis. And this timeless story of crisis then raises the question for us in our plague of locusts, so to say, that has certainly caused more damage than we could have imagined. What will we tell our children? Joel's story offers the blueprint for us. We're to tell our children about the mighty acts of God, culminating in the story about what God did through the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And then we also tell our children about the acts of God in our own lives, and our families' lives, and our faith community's life together. For there's power in the story of what God has done in our lives. We often fear that if we talk about the bad things, then we're giving into them or letting them win. But Joel reminds us that instead we have to speak honestly about them in order to fully understand our deliverance through them. So for us, we'll tell our children honestly about this pandemic. And we'll frame our story about how God's power and presence was made known to us through the life of RCPC. Through God Alive hikes, through parking lot dinners, through small groups and It's a Calling, and youth leading worship on Sunday mornings. We'll share the ways that this community tethered us to God and reminded us that we could turn to God when it felt like there was nowhere we could turn. We'll tell these stories, not with the pandemic as the central part, but with God. Our faithful God who has always been with us and gives us this promise that God will continue to dwell among us and our generations forever. As we look into a new hopeful season with this capital campaign beginning, which you'll have more information coming to your house about this week, we can continue telling and believing in the stories of God's steadfast love in the mighty acts and in our community of faith's life. It's these stories of our shared life together, from the plague of locusts of each generation, that we can look to this vision cast of abundance that's here promised for us. So keep telling the story to your children and the children of our church. Keep telling the story so that they too can go on and tell their children and continue living out this faith in new and imaginative ways, carrying out our faith that's as old as the people of God. May it be so.